The moment Prince Harry walked into Clarence's house alone, clutching a briefcase in one hand and a tiny stuffed Paddington bear in the other, something inside the royal universe cracked so loudly it echoed across continents. This was not the Harry who once burned bridges, abandoned crowns, and declared independence from centuries of royal control. This was a man returning not as a rebel, not as a victim, but as a father who had just realized the woman he once defended against the world had become the very threat he could no longer protect his children from. And the most terrifying part wasn't what Harry said publicly. It was what he had already said privately, the quiet, devastating confession that forced the monarchy to activate its most secret, most feared weapon, the guardianship protocol. Behind palace walls, whispers spread like wildfire. Staff who once watched Harry flee the institution were now watching him run back toward it with urgency that bordered on desperation. The shift was so sudden, so brutal, that insiders described it as watching a man wake up from a 5-year trance. Because this wasn't just about separation. It wasn't just about custody. This was about survival, of legacy, of identity, and of 2 children caught in the middle of a war neither of them asked to inherit. Harry's words, delivered quietly but with chilling clarity, sent shockwaves through royal command structures. He didn't scream, he didn't accuse, he simply invoked the institution. And in royal language, that meant one thing: the gloves were off. What followed was a cascade of events so calculated, so cold, that even seasoned palace insiders struggled to process it. Meghan, once the unstoppable architect of her own narrative, suddenly found herself facing something she could not control: the crown itself. For years, she had moved freely, building her brand, reshaping her image, and positioning herself as something beyond royalty. But the monarchy had been watching, waiting, recording, and now Harry had handed them the justification they needed to act. Legal filings began appearing like silent explosions, each document more devastating than the last. Harry wasn't just asking questions, he was presenting evidence that painted a picture of a household fractured beyond repair. Long absences, secret contracts, private negotiations that never mentioned the children at all. It wasn't framed as revenge, it was framed as protection, and that distinction made it infinitely more dangerous. Because revenge could be dismissed as emotional, protection could not. Inside Montecito, tension had been building for months, invisible to the public, but unmistakable to those close enough to see it. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when Harry entered rooms. Decisions were made without him. Plans moved forward without his knowledge. And slowly, quietly, he began to realize that he was no longer part of the center of his own family. He had become peripheral, replaceable, decorative. And the final blow came when choices involving his children were made without his consent, as if he were no longer their father, but merely an obstacle. It was in that moment, insiders say, that something inside him snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. Because Harry had spent years believing he was protecting his family from the institution, but now he feared he might need the institution to protect his family from something else entirely. The palace responded with terrifying efficiency. Protocols long buried beneath decades of constitutional dust were suddenly resurrected. Meetings were held in rooms that had not been used since constitutional crises of the past. Names like Princess Anne and Prince William re-emerged not as symbolic figures, but as strategic decision-makers preparing for something unprecedented. They weren't reacting emotionally, they were acting institutionally. And institutions do not hesitate. Then came the quiet actions that spoke louder than any public statement ever could. Passports frozen, travel restricted, legal jurisdictions activated across continents. These were not suggestions. These were moves on a chessboard, where Meghan suddenly realized she was no longer controlling the game. Meanwhile, Harry's silence became deafening. He stopped defending, he stopped explaining, he stopped appearing beside her. And in that silence, the truth became impossible to ignore. Because Harry had always spoken when he believed in something. His silence now meant he no longer believed in the version of reality he once fought so hard to defend. Inside royal circles, reactions were cold but decisive. This was no longer about public perception. This was about preservation. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, scandals, betrayals. And now it was preparing to survive this. Meghan, once untouchable, now faced a fortress she could not charm, could not outmaneuver, could not intimidate. Her attempts to maintain control collided with a system designed specifically to withstand individuals, no matter how powerful they believed themselves to be. The most heartbreaking detail of all, insiders revealed, wasn't the legal filings or the frozen privileges. It was the moment Harry reportedly admitted he didn't recognize the life he was living anymore. That realization didn't come with shouting, it came with resignation. with exhaustion, with the quiet grief of a man who realized that love alone had not been enough to hold everything together. And as the monarchy moved forward, step by calculated step, the message became unmistakable. This was not punishment. This was containment. Not retaliation, but reclamation. The public saw headlines, statements, carefully worded releases. But behind those polished surfaces was something far more raw. A father choosing legacy over loyalty. An institution choosing preservation over diplomacy. And a woman who once believed she could reshape the monarchy now discovering that the monarchy had been reshaping the battlefield all along. Because the truth, the devastating truth Harry had finally accepted, was this: he had not escaped the crown. He had simply underestimated how far it was willing to go when it believed its future was at risk. And now, with every legal move, every silent protocol activated, every door closing behind Meghan, the world was watching the slow, irreversible collapse of a fairy tale that had once convinced millions it was untouchable. But the most dangerous part of this story hadn't happened yet, because what the monarchy was preparing to do next would not just separate Harry and Meghan. It would erase everything they once built together. By the time the monarchy made its next move, Meghan had already sensed it coming, but sensing it and stopping it were two entirely different things. Because what she was facing now wasn't Harry's hesitation or palace gossip or media backlash. This was the full weight of a 1,000-year-old institution turning its attention toward her with surgical precision. And once the crown decides to move, it does not stumble, it does not hesitate, it closes in. The first sign came quietly, almost invisibly, buried beneath formal legal language that most people would never notice. But inside royal circles, it landed like a nuclear detonation. The guardianship protocol had officially been activated, not discussed, not threatened, activated. That single action changed everything overnight. It meant the crown was no longer watching from the sidelines, it was intervening directly. And more devastating than the protocol itself was who had agreed to it, Harry. The same man who once fought the monarchy with interviews, accusations, and public defiance had now handed them the authority to step in. And insiders say that moment shattered whatever illusion Meghan had left about where his loyalty truly stood. Behind closed doors, Meghan's fury was immediate and explosive. This wasn't the plan. She had always been the one in control. She had always been 10 steps ahead. But now she realized the battlefield had shifted to territory she could not dominate. Because the monarchy doesn't fight emotionally. It fights structurally, it fights legally, it fights permanently. The palace wasted no time reinforcing its position. Legal channels in both the United Kingdom and the United States began coordinating in ways rarely seen before. Quiet diplomatic messages were sent. Protective provisions were activated. Every possible vulnerability was sealed. Meghan wasn't just facing Harry anymore. She was facing an entire constitutional machine designed specifically to protect its heirs at all costs. And Harry didn't stop it. That was the detail that cut the deepest. Because the silence wasn't confusion anymore, it was consent. For years, Meghan had built her power on one unshakable certainty: Harry would always choose her, against the press, against his family, against the institution itself. But now, that certainty had evaporated, and in its place stood something far more terrifying: Harry choosing something else. Insiders describe his emotional state during those days as hollow, but resolute. Not angry, not vengeful, just finished. The kind of emotional exhaustion that doesn't explode outward, but collapses inward. He had stopped trying to fix things, stopped trying to explain, stopped trying to negotiate. Because in his mind, the line had already been crossed. And once crossed, there was no going back. Meanwhile, the palace moved with frightening calm. Princess Anne emerged as the quiet architect behind the scenes, guiding decisions with cold clarity. Prince William, once distant from his brother, now stepped forward not as an adversary, but as a guardian of the institution's future. Their coordination wasn't emotional, it was procedural, strategic, final. And Meghan began to realize something that no amount of public relations could fix. This wasn't about image anymore. This was about authority. Her attempts to push back legally were immediate, but ineffective, because every motion she filed collided with layers of royal protection she had never fully understood until now. The monarchy had prepared for scenarios like this long before Meghan ever entered Harry's life. It had contingency plans for betrayal, for instability, for crisis. And now those plans were unfolding exactly as designed. Public perception began shifting rapidly. Media narratives that once favored Meghan's independence now questioned her isolation. Allies who once defended her unconditionally began growing quieter, not out of betrayal, but out of uncertainty. because no one wanted to stand against an institution that had clearly decided its course. And then came the moment that insiders say broke whatever remained of Meghan's control. Harry appeared at Windsor, not with cameras, not with statements, just physically present. That single act carried more weight than any legal document ever could, because it symbolized his return, not necessarily to royal life, but to royal alignment. He wasn't fighting the crown anymore. He was standing beside it. And in that moment, Meghan understood something devastating. She wasn't losing a legal battle. She was losing Harry himself. The emotional distance that had once been subtle was now undeniable. He no longer moved in her direction, no longer defended her publicly, no longer reassured her privately. His focus had narrowed to one thing only: the future of his children. And in his mind, that future no longer included the life they had built together. The monarchy recognized that shift instantly and reinforced it with quiet efficiency. Additional legal protections were layered into place. Oversight structures were strengthened. Institutional authority expanded. Each step closing the gap between Meghan's influence and the crown's control. And Meghan, once the unstoppable force who had rewritten royal expectations, now found herself confronting the one thing she could never rewrite: reality. Because reality doesn't bend to narrative. It doesn't submit to branding. It doesn't yield to charisma. Reality is defined by power. And the monarchy had it. The emotional toll became impossible to hide. Reports surfaced of Meghan retreating into isolation, cutting off communication, withdrawing from public appearances. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no strategic moves left to play. Every path forward had been anticipated, every escape route monitored, every advantage neutralized. Meanwhile, Harry remained silent. And that silence was louder than any accusation he could have spoken. Because silence, in moments like this, isn't absence, it's conclusion. Inside palace walls, there was no celebration, no triumph, only resolution. Because for the monarchy, this wasn't about winning, it was about stabilizing, restoring, preserving. But for Meghan, it was something else entirely. It was the moment she realized the life she had fought to build, the independence, the power, the control, had all been standing on one fragile foundation: Harry. And now that foundation was gone. The fairy tale hadn't ended with a dramatic explosion. It ended with something far colder: withdrawal, distance, finality. The monarchy had not chased Meghan out. It had simply closed its doors, and Harry had chosen to stay inside.